Inadequacy isn't just psychological, it isn't just social. To understand why you feel inadequate, we need to go deeper than childhood wounds, deeper than evolution, deeper than capitalism. We need to examine the existential structure of selfhood itself, to the foundation of what it means to be human, to questions philosophy has wrestled with for centuries. And that means it goes all the way down, to the bottom of human experience, to the questions you don't want to ask. Why am I here? What does my life mean? What happens when I die? And most terrifying of all, what if there are no answers? In 1849, a Danish philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard published a book with a curious title, The Sickness Unto Death. Not a sickness that kills you, a sickness you carry until death, a sickness of the soul. Kierkegaard wrote, "So to be sick unto death is not to be able to die, yet not as though there were hope of life. No, the hopelessness in this case is that even the last hope, death, is not available. When death is the greatest danger, one hopes for life, but when one becomes acquainted with an even more dreadful danger, one hopes for death. So when the danger is so great that death has become one's hope, despair is the disconsolateness of not being able to die. A despair that you cannot escape, not through tragedy or loss, not through achievement, not through becoming someone else. The despair that comes from the impossible task of being yourself. Kierkegaard understood something that most people spend their entire lives running from. The self is not a thing you have. It's not something fixed that you discover. The self, Kierkegaard argued, is a relation, specifically a relation that relates itself to itself, between who you are, who you want to be, and who you think you should be. And here's what makes this unbearable. Kierkegaard understood that human beings exist in this impossible tension, this synthesis of opposites that can never be resolved. You are finite and infinite simultaneously, temporal and eternal, determined by your past, yet free to create your future. The self is the attempt to hold these contradictions together, an attempt that is always failing. This is what Kierkegaard meant by the sickness unto death, not depression, not anxiety, but despair. Kierkegaard wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. No other loss can occur so quietly." And Kierkegaard identified 3 ways this happens, 3 forms of despair, and you need to understand this because you're living in at least one of them right now, possibly all 3 at once. The first form, despair at not being conscious of having a self. This is the person who never questions, who follows the script society handed them, who lives on autopilot. Get the degree, get the job, get married, have kids, retire, die. Never once asking, is this what I actually want? Never once asking, who am I beneath all these roles? They avoid inadequacy by never becoming a self at all, by never individuating, by remaining unconscious. And on the surface, this might look like contentment, like someone who has it figured out, but Kierkegaard saw through this. This isn't contentment, it's self-deception, not peace, but numbness, the absence of pain, mistaken for the presence of meaning. The despair is still there, underground, unacknowledged, appearing as a vague sense that something is missing, a quiet voice late at night that whispers, "Is this all there is?" before being drowned out by tomorrow's obligations. You avoid inadequacy by never becoming a self at all. The second form, despair at not willing to be oneself. This is the inadequacy you know intimately, viscerally, the one that lives in your chest like a stone. The despair of wanting to be someone else, anyone else. This is you, looking in the mirror and hating what you see, thinking that everyone else has it figured out except you. Kierkegaard called this the despair of weakness. You are in despair at being yourself, so you spend your entire life trying to become someone else. Because who you actually are feels fundamentally inadequate, fundamentally wrong, fundamentally not enough. And here's the cruelest part. Even when you achieve something, even when you temporarily become that idealized version, the goalpost moves, the inadequacy returns. Because you're not trying to be yourself, you're trying to be anyone but yourself, which is an impossible task, a game you can never win. The third form, despair in willing to be oneself. Wait, isn't this the answer? Just be yourself. Accept who you are. Find your authentic self and the inadequacy disappears. But Kierkegaard understood something that shatters this entire idea. There is no fixed, true self waiting to be discovered underneath all your conditioning. The self isn't something you find. It's something you create continuously, every moment, through every choice. And that creation is never finished, never complete, never adequate compared to what it could be. You think if you could just peel away the layers, excavate through the expectations and the wounds and the false personas, you'd find the real you. And if you could just be that person, you'd finally be enough. But that's the trap. The self is not an object you discover. It's a process you enact, a relation that must constantly relate itself to itself, which means you are always in the act of becoming, always inadequate compared to who you could be, always falling short of the self you're trying to create. This is what Kierkegaard called the despair of defiance, the anxiety of self-creation. You are always becoming, never arriving. So let's see where we are. If you don't try to be a self, you live in unconscious despair, numb and empty. If you reject yourself and want to be someone else, you live in the inadequacy you know so well, the constant comparison and self-hatred. If you try to create yourself, you live in the anxiety of endless becoming, the burden of self-creation without a rival. There is no escape. Inadequacy is woven into the structure of human existence, into the very nature of being a self. This is the sickness unto death, not a sickness you can cure, but a sickness built into what it means to be human. Kierkegaard wrote all of this in 1849 in Christian Denmark, where God provided the answer to the riddle of the self, where faith could resolve the despair, where there was a cosmic story that told you who you were and why you mattered. But what happens when that story disappears? When God is gone? When tradition collapses? When you're left alone with the impossible task of creating yourself in a universe that provides no guidance, no meaning, no purpose? What happens when you must create your own meaning from nothing? That question drove a man to the edge of human experience, to the darkest place humanity has ever created, where he learned what happens when meaning is stripped away. And somehow, in that hell, he found an answer about what makes a human life worth living. September 1942. A train arrives at Auschwitz carrying a 37-year-old Austrian psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl. Within hours of arrival, he's stripped of everything: his clothes, his possessions, the manuscript of his life's work, hidden in his coat lining, his name replaced by a prisoner number. His wife is sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she dies, his mother to the gas chambers, his brother to another camp. Everything that gave his life meaning, his family, his work, his identity, his future, is taken from him. And in that complete annihilation of everything that made life worth living, Frankl observed something that would change our understanding of human existence. In the concentration camps, surrounded by death and suffering beyond imagination, Frankl watched who survived and who gave up, who held on, and who walked into the electric fence. And what he discovered was this: the prisoners who survived weren't the strongest, they weren't the healthiest. They were the ones who had a reason to live, a person to reunite with, a work to complete, a meaning that made the suffering bearable. After liberation, barely alive, Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 Days, a book that would become one of the most important psychological texts of the 20th century, because it answered a question that everyone asks but few dare to speak aloud. What makes life worth living when everything is taken from you? Frankl's answer was radical, contradicting both Freud and Adler, the two giants of psychiatry he'd trained under. He writes, "Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life, and not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. Not pleasure, not power. Meaning. When life has meaning, extreme suffering becomes bearable." Frankl watched prisoners endure unimaginable horror because they had something to live for. When life lacks meaning, even pleasure becomes empty. Frankl identified the existential crisis that defines modern life. You must create your own meaning, and that task is unbearable. Frankl called this the existential vacuum, a widespread sense of meaninglessness that he saw growing in modern society, particularly in affluent Western cultures, where material needs were met but spiritual emptiness prevailed. In Man's Search for Meaning, he writes, "The existential vacuum is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, or he does what other people wish him to do. Your ancestors had a story. Religion told them why they existed. Tradition told them how to live. Community gave them a role, and inadequacy could be resolved by fulfilling that role, by being a good Christian, a dutiful son, a productive member of the tribe. But those structures are gone, or hollow, or optional, or contradictory. You stand in the ruins of systems that no longer function, surrounded by 1,000 competing narratives about what makes a life valuable. And you must choose. You must create your own meaning from nothing in a universe that has no inherent meaning. And this is where inadequacy becomes existentially terrifying. What if you choose wrong? What if the meaning you create is worthless? What if you waste your one life on something that doesn't matter? What if you build your entire identity around becoming enough, achieving enough, earning enough, proving enough, and then realize that enough was never meaningful to begin with? Just another way to avoid the real question. Frankl understood that the burden of creating meaning is almost unbearable, that humans will do almost anything to avoid it. They'll conform, doing what everyone else does so they don't have to choose. Or they'll submit, letting someone else tell them what matters so they don't have to decide. Or they'll fill their lives with distractions and pleasures and achievements that feel like meaning but are actually just elaborate ways of avoiding the question. And here's what nobody tells you. Inadequacy becomes the substitute for meaning. It becomes the distraction, the noble struggle, the lifelong project that protects you from the terrifying freedom of having to choose what matters. Frankl showed that your life doesn't need cosmic significance. Meaning is personal, unique. For him in the camps, it was the thought of his wife, the hope of reunion, those specific, concrete reasons to survive another day. For you, it might be the people you love, the work you feel called to do, the creative vision only you can manifest, the specific corner of the world only you can tend to. And yet, even when you find meaning, even when you identify what makes your life significant, there's something lurking beneath it, something Frankl couldn't fully escape even with his answer. because meaning doesn't save you from mortality. His wife still died. His mother was still murdered. His body still carried the scars and starvation and trauma for the rest of his life. You can find meaning, and you will still die. That meaning will die with you. Everything you built will dissolve into the void. So we have one more question to face, one more layer of this abyss to descend into. The question that sits beneath inadequacy, beneath meaninglessness, beneath everything else, the question of freedom itself. The terrifying freedom to create yourself in a universe that gives you no essence, no purpose, no justification. A man who looked at human existence without the comfort of religion, without the structure of tradition, without anything to soften the blow of what we actually are. And what he saw was terrifying. Paris, 1945. The war is over. France is liberated. A French philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre is sitting in a cafe, writing something that will shatter the foundations of human identity. Not about politics, not about morality, about something more fundamental, a question that kept him awake at night, about what you are. So what are you? Not what you do, not what you believe, not your roles or achievements or identities. Underneath all of that, what actually are you? According to Sartre, the answer is simple. You are your choices. Nothing more, nothing less. Every action, every decision, every moment you chose to act or not act, that's what you are. Let me explain what this means. Sartre writes, "Man is nothing else than his plan. He exists only to the extent that he fulfills himself. He is therefore nothing else than the ensemble of his acts, nothing else than his life. You are not your intentions, not your potential, not your dreams, or the person you tell yourself you could be someday. You are your actions. Only what you actually do defines you." This is what Sartre meant by existence precedes essence. Think about the moment you were born. You didn't arrive with a purpose stamped on you, no instruction manual, no predetermined destiny, no true self waiting inside you to be discovered. You just existed, a blank slate screaming into the void. And only through your choices, through what you actually do you create what you are. And this leads to the most terrifying sentence Sartre ever wrote. Sartre writes, "Man is condemned to be free, condemned because he did not create himself, in other respect is free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." Condemned. You didn't choose to exist. You didn't choose your circumstances, your body, your family, the world you were born into. But from the moment you exist, you are free, radically, absolutely, inescapably free. Free to choose how you respond to your circumstances, free to create meaning or reject it, free to become whoever you decide to become. And here's what makes this unbearable. You cannot escape this freedom, and you cannot escape responsibility for your choices. Let me show you what this means in the mundane horror of your actual life. This morning, your alarm went off. You hit snooze. That was a choice. You checked your phone before getting out of bed. That was a choice. At work, someone asked how you're doing. You said, "Fine," when you weren't. That was a choice. You come home exhausted and scroll for 2 hours instead of working on the thing you say matters to you. That was a choice. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Not because you have to, because you're choosing to. Even not choosing is a choice. Even passivity is an active decision. Even saying "I can't" is choosing not to. You cannot say, "I had no choice." You cannot say, "That's just my nature." You cannot say, "I couldn't help it." At every single moment, you are authoring the story of your life. This is what Sartre called anguish, the dizzying, nauseating vertigo of absolute freedom. Because if you are completely free and completely responsible, you cannot blame anyone else for your life. Not your parents for how they raised you. Not society for its expectations. Not your trauma for shaping you. Not your biology for limiting you. Those things influenced you, but they didn't determine you. And this is unbearable. So what do people do with this unbearable freedom? They lie to themselves. Sartre called it bad faith. The lies we tell ourselves to escape the terror of freedom. Bad faith is when you pretend you're not free. Sartre gives the famous example of the waiter to explain this. The waiter who performs being a waiter so completely, the exaggerated movements, the mechanical precision, the overly polite voice, that he forgets it's a role. He thinks, I am a waiter. This is what I do. This is who I am. But Sartre sees through it. He chose this job. He could quit tomorrow. He could walk out right now. But if he admits that, he'd have to face his freedom. It's his freedom. So he becomes the role. He disappears into it. We all do this. Bad faith isn't just lying to others. It's a specific psychological maneuver. You treat your freedom as if it were a constraint. You take the roles you've chosen, employee, parent, partner, and pretend they determine your behavior, as if the role makes your choices for you. You take the patterns you've established through repeated choices and call them personality or nature, as if your past removes your freedom to choose differently now. You take your fears and uncertainties and transform them into limitations, as if being afraid is the same as being unable. When you become your role, your identity, your nature, you no longer have to be free. But there's something even more insidious about bad faith. You can use your limitations as an excuse. And here, right here, we arrive at the revelation. The reason we've descended this far into philosophy, the connection that makes everything clear. Inadequacy is a form of bad faith. Think about what inadequacy actually does. It turns freedom into fate. When you believe you're inadequate, you're not describing a fact about yourself. You're creating an essence, a fixed nature that removes your freedom. Sartre would see this immediately. Inadequacy is bad faith disguised as humility. Here's the mechanism. Freedom is unbearable because it means you're responsible for your choices. But if you're inadequate, you're not really choosing, are you? You're just limited, constrained, determined by your lack of capability. Inadequacy transforms I'm choosing not to into I can't. And thinking I can't removes responsibility, removes freedom, removes the terrifying burden of having to choose. This is why inadequacy feels so comfortable, because it's not a problem to solve. It's a solution to a different problem, the problem of being free. As long as you're inadequate, you don't have to act. You don't have to risk. You don't have to face the possibility that you're capable and simply choosing not to use that capability. You get to be a victim of your own limitations rather than the author of your own inaction. Inadequacy is the perfect alibi for a life unlived, the perfect shelter from freedom. Inadequacy becomes your essence, a fixed nature that removes your responsibility. So here's what we've discovered at the bottom of this abyss. Your inadequacy isn't a wound from childhood, or biology, or bad luck. It's a choice to escape the self that never aligns, a choice to avoid creating meaning, a choice to hide from the terror of freedom. You feel inadequate because inadequacy is safer than being free. So here we are, at the bottom. You've seen how it all works, the psychology, the biology, the economics, the philosophy. You understand now that inadequacy isn't a personal failing. It's a rational response to impossible conditions, a feature of human consciousness itself. And you might be thinking, okay, now I know. Now I can fix it. You can't fix it. Not the way you think. Something has shifted. You're not asking the wrong question anymore. Because for years you've been asking, how do I become enough? That was always the wrong question. Because enough was never real. It was a moving target, a rigged game, a shelter you built from freedom. The real question is this: what if I already am? What if there's nothing to fix? What happens next isn't philosophy. It's something harder, something that requires you to stop running, stop fixing, stop performing, and face the one person you've been trying to escape, yourself. Here's the truth. I can't hand you a formula that makes inadequacy disappear. Anyone who promises that is selling you the same trap we just spent 50 minutes dismantling. But I promised you I'd show you the way through, and I will. But first, you need to understand something. The way through isn't what you think it is. Let's quickly go through what we've discovered. Inadequacy isn't a bug in your psychology. It's evolutionary survival. It's not a wound from childhood. It's a psychological structure that was built into you. It's not a personal failing. It's a rational response to impossible conditions. And, most importantly, it's a choice you're making every single day. So here's the final truth. You cannot eliminate inadequacy. That project is over. It was always impossible. But you can stop letting it run your life. And this shift, this single recognition, can transform your entire existence. There are two fundamental ways to live with inadequacy, and understanding this distinction is everything. The first way is the one you know intimately. Believe it. Let it define you. Spend decades trying to fix it, improve it, transcend it, overcome it. Chase achievement after achievement, hoping the next one will finally make you feel whole. This is the path you've been on, and you know exactly where it leads, right back to inadequacy. But there's a second way, a completely different relationship to the same feeling. This path doesn't try to eliminate inadequacy or fix it or transcend it. Instead, you see it, recognize it for exactly what it is: a story, a pattern, a psychological mechanism you now understand completely. And then you choose to act anyway, not because you fixed yourself, but because you're choosing freedom over safety. You're choosing to live as the author of your life rather than as the victim of your inadequacy. The shift isn't about changing who you are. It's about changing your relationship to the story you've been telling yourself. Because here's what you need to understand. Inadequacy is a story, a narrative, a lens through which you interpret every experience, every relationship, every moment of your existence. And you've been treating that story as if it's true, as if it's you. It's not. It never was. Let me show you what this actually looks like in the concrete reality of your daily life, because this isn't abstract philosophy. This is about tomorrow morning. You wake up. Same bed, same body, same responsibilities waiting for you. And the inadequacy will be there. That familiar heaviness. The voice starting its morning commentary about how you're already behind, already not enough, already failing compared to everyone else who has it figured out. Here's what changes with this shift. Instead of believing that voice, you simply recognize it. You notice it arising. You see it as a pattern, a habit, a story your mind is telling you. Not because the story is true, but because your mind has been trained to tell the story. It's what minds do. They create narratives. They generate interpretations. They produce endless commentary. In this moment of simple recognition, something profound happens. A space opens up, a space between the feeling and your response to it. That space, that gap, is where your freedom lives. Because in that space, you have a choice. You can believe the story and let it determine your entire day. Or you can see it as a story, acknowledge it, and then choose your action based on something else entirely. Your values, your intentions, what actually matters to you. Later that day, a friend asks you about that project you've been putting off. The inadequacy hits immediately. It floods your system with familiar narratives about how you're a failure. Your old response, the one you've been running for decades, would be to believe all of that, to let it determine your reaction. But here's what's different now. This time, you notice it happening. You see the familiar story your mind is telling, and instead of disappearing into it, you ask yourself, what do I actually want to do about this project? See the difference? One response is purely reactive. You're being controlled by the story, moved around like a puppet by invisible strings. The other response is genuinely responsive. This small shift from being consumed by the feeling to witnessing it is where freedom lives. So here's what I'm going to give you. Not a cure, not a fix. A practice. A way of living that doesn't eliminate inadequacy but stops it from running your life. The first practice is deceptively simple but absolutely transformative. Every time you notice inadequacy arising, you add 5 words that change everything. Instead of thinking, I'm not enough, you think, I'm having the thought that I'm not enough. Instead of, I'm a failure, you think, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. This isn't just semantic wordplay or psychological trickery. This is the fundamental difference between being trapped inside the story and being able to witness the story from outside of it. You're the one having the thought. The thought is something you're experiencing, not something you are. One makes you the victim of your inadequacy. The other makes you the observer of your inadequacy. And the observer is free. The observer can watch the thought arise, notice its familiar pattern, recognize where it came from, and then choose whether to believe it or not. The observer has power. The observer has choice. The second practice cuts deeper. When inadequacy arises, most people start the diagnostic process, trying to identify the flaw, locate the deficiency, figure out what needs to be fixed. But that question keeps you trapped in the inadequacy paradigm. Instead, ask this: what am I actually afraid will happen if I'm not enough? Really sit with this. This question is crucial because inadequacy isn't actually about being inadequate. It's about the consequences you're trying to avoid. If I stop trying to be enough, if I accept myself exactly as I am right now, what am I afraid will happen? Maybe you're afraid you'll lose all motivation and become completely stagnant. Maybe you're afraid you'll stop growing or improving. Maybe you're afraid people will reject you once they see who you really are. Maybe you're afraid you'll prove to yourself that you actually are worthless. Maybe you're afraid you'll waste your entire life on nothing meaningful. Write those fears down and look at the list. You're already afraid of those things. Inadequacy hasn't been protecting you from those fears. It keeps you trapped inside them. The third practice requires you to make a crucial distinction that most people never make. You can take the exact same action for 2 completely different reasons, and the experience of that action will be entirely different. For example, if you want to work out, you can work out. Driven by inadequacy, you can work out because you're disgusting and terrified that no one will love you if you don't transform your body. Driven by values, or you can work out because you value vitality, because you want to feel strong and alive in your body, because movement matters to you. Same action, completely different experience. One is compulsive, exhausting, never enough. The other is intentional, sustainable, free. You're doing it because it aligns with what matters to you, regardless of whether it makes you adequate. So examine your life, look at what you're actually doing every day, and ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm trying to escape inadequacy, Or am I doing this because it genuinely matters to me? Identify your actual values, not what you think you should value, not what looks good, not what would make you seem adequate, what genuinely, deeply matters to you. Maybe it's connection, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's growth or service or beauty or truth. Write those down, look at them, and then practice taking one action every day that's aligned with those values, regardless of whether that action makes you feel adequate. This is what Viktor Frankl discovered in the concentration camps. Meaning doesn't come from being enough. It comes from living according to what matters. The fourth practice is the hardest because it asks you to stop trying to resolve something that can't be resolved. You must learn to hold a paradox. Two apparently contradictory truths that are both simultaneously valid. Here it is. You are already enough. And you will never feel enough. Both are true. Both must be held at the same time. You are already whole, complete, worthy of love and belonging exactly as you are in this moment. Nothing you could achieve or accomplish or become would make you more fundamentally worthy than you already are. Your worth isn't conditional. It isn't earned. It simply is. And simultaneously, your brain is wired to feel inadequate. Evolution designed you to compare yourself to others. Your nervous system is programmed to never feel satisfied. The hedonic treadmill is built into your neurobiology. Most people spend their entire lives trying to resolve this paradox. They try to make one side win. The freedom isn't in eliminating one side of the paradox. The freedom is in holding both sides simultaneously without needing to resolve the tension. You are enough, and you feel inadequate. You are worthy, and you doubt yourself. All of it is true. All of it can coexist. The fifth practice is the most important, and it's brutally simple. Act anyway. Not after you feel confident, not after you feel ready, not after you feel adequate. Now, as you are, inadequate and all. Write the thing even though you're convinced it's terrible. Apply for the opportunity even though you're certain you'll be rejected. Show up authentically even though you're terrified of judgment. Love people even though you feel unworthy of being loved back. Create even though you're sure you're not talented enough. Start even though you're convinced you're not ready. Not because you fixed your inadequacy, not because you finally become adequate, but because you're choosing freedom, because you're choosing to live as the author of your life rather than as the victim of your feelings. Remember Sartre, you are your actions, not your feelings, not your thoughts, not your inadequacy, not your potential, not your intentions, your actions. That's what you are, nothing else. And every single moment that you act despite inadequacy, you're proving to yourself that inadequacy doesn't define you. You're creating concrete evidence in the world that you are not your story. You're demonstrating through your choices that you're free. So let me tell you what actually happens when you start living this way. The inadequacy doesn't disappear, but its power over you does. It becomes like weather. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a storm, sometimes it's a passing cloud, but it's no longer you. You're the sky that holds it all. Here's what I want you to understand. Everything we've covered, the psychology, the evolution, the economics, the philosophy, the practices, it all comes down to this moment. Right now. Not tomorrow. Not after you've practiced more. Not when you feel ready. Right now. You have a choice. You can close this video and go back to trying to fix yourself. Chase the next achievement, buy the next course, try the next strategy. Or you can stop. Stop trying to become enough. and start living as though you already are. What would you do differently if you truly believed you were already enough? What would you create? Who would you love? What would you risk? What would you do right now if inadequacy wasn't stopping you? Do that. Not perfectly, not confidently. Just do it. You've seen the cage. You understand the machinery, the evolutionary traps, the economic incentives, the existential structure. You know how it all works, and that knowledge changes everything, not because it eliminates inadequacy, but because it eliminates the illusion that inadequacy is the truth about who you are. You were never broken. You were never weak. You were never alone. You were always enough. You just forgot. The choice is yours. It always has been.